You ever feel like you walked into someone else's script? 2 weeks before my brother's wedding, his fiancée fanned out a list. Pay $3,000 and sign an NDA or don't bother showing up. That's when the polite smiles disappeared and the family split down the middle. Stick around, you won't believe what she wanted us to promise in ink. My name is Sarah. I'm 32, and my brother, Mark, has always been the golden boy of our family. Not in a spoiled way, but in that way that just makes you want to root for him. He's got this easy smile and a kind heart, the type of person who'd pull over in a rainstorm to help you change a tire. We grew up in a small town where everyone knows your business, but they also bring you a casserole when you're sick. Our family was always like that, tight-knit, a little loud, but solid. We weren't rich, not by a long shot, but we were rich in a way that mattered. Sunday dinners, holiday traditions, showing up for each other without a second thought. That was our currency. So when Mark got engaged to Hannah, it felt like the final, perfect piece of the puzzle was clicking into place. He'd had a rough go with relationships in the past, a couple of heartbreaks that had left him wary and a little closed off. But Hannah, she was different. She was polished, ambitious, and came from a family with money, the kind of quiet, old money that our town only saw in movies. She seemed to adore Mark, and for the first time in years, he looked genuinely, unshakably happy. My parents were over the moon. My mom started crying the moment Mark showed her the ring, and my dad, a man of few words, just clapped him on the shoulder with this look of pure pride. We all welcomed Hannah with open arms. We figured love was love, and if she made him happy, that was all that mattered. The wedding planning started immediately, and it was clear from the get-go that this was Hannah's show. It was going to be at some exclusive, historic estate 2 hours away, a place with manicured gardens and a price tag that made my eyes water just thinking about it. We all just chalked it up to her different background. We were used to church basements and backyard barbecues. She was used to valet parking and string quartets. We tried to be supportive, even as the details got more and more elaborate. We figured it was her big day, and we were just lucky to be a part of it. The polite smiles stayed on, even when we felt a little out of our depth. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, my phone buzzed. It was a group text from Hannah to me, my parents, and our other brother, Tyler. The message was brief and breezy. "Hi everyone, so excited for the big day. Just sending over the final guest policy to make sure we're all on the same page. Please review and send back the signed agreement by the end of the week. Can't wait to celebrate with you. XOX, Hannah." I remember thinking guest policy was a weirdly corporate term for a wedding, but I tapped on the attachment. It was a PDF file. The first page had their engagement photo at the top, looking glossy and perfect, and right below it, in a crisp sans serif font, was the title, Guest Experience Contribution and Confidentiality Agreement. My blood ran cold before I even got to the details. I scrolled down, my thumb shaking slightly. There it was, laid out in neat bullet points. Section A, Guest Contribution. A non-refundable payment of $3,000 per person was required to secure your place and contribute to the exclusive, curated experience. Section B, Confidentiality. A multi-page, legally binding non-disclosure agreement that prohibited any discussion of the event's budget, logistics, or any private family matters that might arise during the celebration. It also strictly forbade any unapproved photography or social media posts. I just stared at my phone, stunned into silence. It felt like a prank, a sick, elaborate joke. $3,000? An NDA? From family? The polite smile didn't just disappear. They shattered. I suddenly realized we weren't walking into a wedding. We were being asked to buy a ticket to a performance, and the price of admission was our money and our silence. A question echoed in my head, one that would come to define the next 2 weeks of my life. Why would someone ask their own family to pay for their love and promise in writing to keep their secrets? If your own sibling sent you something like that, what would you do? Would you sign the papers and show up with a smile? Or would you walk away? Before I could even process the document on my screen, my phone started ringing. It was my mom. I answered, and all I heard was a choked sob. "Sarah, did you see it?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Did you see what she sent?" I didn't need to ask what she was talking about. I could hear the rustle of paper in the background. She must have printed it out. "I see it, Mom," I said, my own voice feeling distant and strange. "She wants us to pay to come to our own son's wedding." She started crying in earnest then, a deep, wounded sound that twisted something in my gut. "And the other thing," she managed to get out between sobs, the contract, like we're spies, like we're the enemy." In the background, I could hear my dad. He wasn't yelling. He was worse. He was quiet. I could picture him perfectly, standing in the kitchen, jaw tight, his knuckles probably white as he gripped the edge of the counter. The only sound he made was this low, grinding noise of his teeth, a sound he only made when he was pushed past anger into a place of cold, hard fury. My brother, Mark, tried to do damage control almost immediately. He called me about 20 minutes later, his voice rushed and defensive. "Hey, so I know that email was a little unconventional," he started, a nervous laugh in his voice. "Hannah just wants everything to be perfect. The venue it's a lot. This is just a way to make sure everyone who comes is really invested in the day." I felt a surge of disbelief. "Invested, Mark? She's asking your own mother to pay $3,000. She's asking our father to sign a legal document promising not to talk about his own son's wedding. This isn't an investment, it's an insult." He sighed, a long, weary sound. "It's not like that, Sarah. It's complicated. Hannah has her reasons." Complicated. That was the word he kept using, a verbal shield he held up to deflect every question. When I got off the phone with him, I went to my printer and printed out the PDF. I needed to see it, to feel it in my hands. The paper was still warm as I laid the pages out on my dining room table. It felt heavier than it should. The letterhead at the top wasn't a cute wedding monogram. It was the name of a law firm. The font was sterile. The language was dense with legalese. Phrases like heretofore, in perpetuity, and liquidated damages. At the very end, there was a signature line, stark and demanding, waiting for my name. This wasn't a wedding document. It was a business transaction, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. It felt official, and it felt final. I couldn't shake the image of my brother's face, the desperate tone in his voice. This wasn't the Mark I knew. The Mark I grew up with would have been horrified by this. He would have been the first one to call it ridiculous. But this new Mark, the one on the phone, sounded like a man trapped, repeating a script someone else had written for him. And that's when my mind drifted back to a few years ago. Mark had been in a serious relationship with a woman named Chloe. It had ended badly, catastrophically so. She had been unfaithful, and when she confronted her, she didn't just leave. She tried to scorch the earth behind her. She aired all their private arguments on social media, told twisted half-truths to their mutual friends, and painted him as some kind of monster. It was a brutal, public humiliation that sent him into a spiral. A year, he barely dated, barely trusted anyone. He became obsessed with privacy, with controlling the narrative. He was terrified of ever being that vulnerable, that exposed again. Looking at the NDA on my table, a painful thought clicked into place. Maybe this wasn't about Hannah's desire for a curated experience. Maybe this was about Mark's deepest fear. Maybe he was so desperate to avoid another public drama, another Chloe, that he was willing to do anything to guarantee a perfect, controlled, drama-free day. Maybe he saw this contract not as an insult, but as a shield. The thought didn't make me angry anymore. It just made me incredibly sad for him. Later that evening, I drove over to his and Hannah's new house, the one her parents had helped them buy. I found him in the garage organizing tools he'd probably never use. It was the only part of the house that still felt like him. I leaned against the doorframe. "Mark, can we talk? For real?" He stopped what he was doing, but didn't look at me. "There's nothing to talk about, Sarah." I stepped closer. "This thing with the money and the NDA, Is this really you? Is this what you want? He finally turned to face me, and his eyes were hollow. He looked exhausted. It's what we need to do to make this wedding happen peacefully, he said, his voice flat. Hannah, she has her reasons, important reasons. It's better this way. I pressed him, my voice dropping to a whisper. What reasons, Mark? What are you two so afraid of that you have to lock down your own family? He just shook his head, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Just trust me on this, okay? Please, for me, just sign the damn thing. He insisted Hannah had reasons, but the way he said it, the desperate plea in his eyes, it was clear he was hiding something. Or maybe she was hiding something from all of us. Would you keep pushing your brother for answers in that moment, or would you back off and give him the space to figure it out on his own? The next day, I sat down and read the PDF again, this time with a highlighter, like I was studying for an exam. The more I read, the more my stomach churned. The initial shock had been about the big, glaring numbers and the acronym NDA, but the real poison was in the fine print. The $3,000 contribution was, as stated, non-refundable. The only exception was if the wedding was canceled by the bride and groom, and even then, refunds would be processed at the discretion of the event organizers, meaning Hannah and her family. So if you got sick, had a family emergency, or simply couldn't make it, your $3,000 was gone. It was a donation to the cause. But the confidentiality agreement was where things went from outrageous to genuinely sinister. The clause forbidding social media wasn't just about posting pictures of the bride before she walked down the aisle. It was a blanket ban. No photos, no videos, no status updates mentioning the event, not before, during, or for a period of 1 year after the wedding date. It even specified that guests were not to take unauthorized family photographs on personal devices. The idea of not being able to snap a picture of my own parents dancing or a silly photo with my brother Tyler felt like a violation. This wasn't about protecting the bride's first look. This was about controlling every single image, every single memory that came out of the day. And then there was the clause about the press. Guests agree not to speak with any member of the media, including but not limited to journalists, bloggers, or content creators regarding the event or the families involved. I had to laugh at that. The media? We were a family of teachers, mechanics, and nurses from a town that barely made it onto a map. The only press that had ever cared about us was the local paper when my dad won the chili cook-off. It felt so grandiose, so absurdly paranoid, that it was almost funny, until I realized they were completely serious. My brother Tyler and I met for coffee that afternoon. He was even angrier than I was. I talked to Hannah about it, he said, stirring his coffee so hard it sloshed over the rim. You know what she said? She said this was about elevating the brand of the event, her words. Elevating the brand. She said by making it so exclusive and private, the guests who did come would feel like they were part of something truly special. I shook my head in disbelief. It's a wedding, not a VIP club opening. Tyler snorted. That's exactly what I said. I told her it felt like she was charging a cover fee to get into a private club, and she didn't even deny it. She said, exactly, it's a curated guest list. He leaned forward, his eyes dark with frustration. This isn't about protecting Mark's feelings, Sarah. This is about her image. She's building a wall around her perfect day, and she wants us to pay for the bricks. The final blow came in the form of a calendar notification. Hannah had sent out a digital RSVP with the subject line, Final Headcount and Compliance Deadline. The body of the email was short and cold. It stated that anyone who had not submitted their payment and signed agreement by Friday at 5 p.m. would be respectfully moved to the non-attending list to free up their spot. It was a digital guillotine. Pay up and shut up, or you're out. There was no room for discussion, no space for compromise. The ultimatum was laid bare. I spent the next few days in a state of quiet turmoil. It wasn't just about the money, though the unfairness of it stung. $3,000 was more than my monthly mortgage payment. It was a significant financial burden that she was dropping on us without a hint of apology. But the moral load felt so much heavier. Signing that document felt like betraying something essential about our family. We were people who talked things out, who argued and made up, who shared our joys and our sorrows openly. This contract was designed to suffocate that. It was asking me to agree, in writing, that my relationship with my brother was conditional, that my presence at one of the most important days of his life was something that could be bought and sold. Friday afternoon, I sat at my computer, the online banking page open in one tab and the PDF in another. The cursor blinked rhythmically on the screen. 4:45 p.m. The deadline was minutes away. I thought about my mom's heartbroken voice on the phone. I thought about the potential humiliation for my family if half of us were missing. I thought about Mark, my sweet, lost brother, who was so clearly in over his head. Maybe, just maybe, paying the money and signing the paper was the only way to keep the peace. Maybe I could just swallow my pride, transfer the funds, and pretend this whole ugly episode never happened. I opened my wallet, my fingers hovering over my debit card. How much would you be willing to pay to keep the peace in your own family? Be honest with yourself. That Friday night, my parents called for a family dinner. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. The air in their house was so thick with tension, you could have cut it with a knife. The smell of my mom's pot roast, usually a source of comfort, did nothing to ease the strain. We sat around the dining table, the four of us, me, my brother Tyler, and my parents, while two empty chairs stared back at us, a silent testament to Mark and Hannah's absence. My mom was the first to break the silence. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she twisted her napkin in her lap. "I think we should just pay it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't bear the thought of not being at your brother's wedding. The shame of it. What will people say?" My dad slammed his fork down on his plate, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "Helen, are you listening to yourself? Shame? The only shame here is that our son is allowing his fiancée to extort his own family. I will not be bullied into paying for a ticket to my own son's wedding. It's a matter of principle." Tyler sided with Dad immediately. "He's right, Mom. This is insane. If we give in now, what's next? Will we have to sign an NDA to come over for Christmas? Pay a fee to hold our future nephew?" The argument escalated from there, a raw, messy explosion of hurt and anger that had been simmering for days. My mom accused my dad of being stubborn, of putting his pride before his son. My dad shot back that she was teaching Mark that this kind of behavior was acceptable. The sibling anger that had been bubbling between me and Mark now felt like a chasm opening up between all of us. I just sat there, watching the family I thought was unbreakable start to splinter right in front of me. The fallout spread beyond our house. News travels fast in a small town. People weren't talking about the wedding colors or the honeymoon destination anymore. They were whispering about the contract. My Aunt Carol, my mom's sister and the town's foremost gossip, called me under the guise of just checking in. "I heard the most bizarre rumor," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Something about a fee to attend? Surely that can't be right." I gave her a non-committal answer, but the damage was done. Friends started looking at me with pity. I felt like I had a giant flashing sign over my head, the sister who can't afford to go to her own brother's wedding. The narrative was already being twisted. It wasn't about principle anymore. It was about money. It was about our family's reputation versus my personal integrity, and I felt utterly alone in the fight. The pressure from outside our family was just as intense. On Monday morning, a week before the wedding, we each received a new email. This one wasn't from Hannah. It was from the law firm on the letterhead of the NDA. It was a friendly reminder that the deadline for compliance had passed and that they were finalizing the official guest list for venue security. Then came the line that felt like a punch to the gut. Please be advised that any attempts to attend the event without prior confirmation and contractual agreement will be viewed as trespassing. For the security and privacy of the couple, non-attendance of invited guests who have not complied will be duly noted. It wasn't just an uninvitation anymore, it was a threat. They were creating a paper trail, documenting our refusal, as if preparing for a lawsuit we couldn't even comprehend. The tension, which was already at a breaking point, spiked into full-blown panic. My mom called me, crying again, convinced Hannah was going to sue us. For what? I didn't even know. That evening, Mark called me. His voice was different. It wasn't defensive or evasive. It was cold. "I heard you still haven't signed," he said. No preamble, no hello. "No, Mark, I haven't." There was a long pause on the line. I could hear him breathing, a ragged sound. Then he said, his voice low and heavy, "If you don't come, Sarah, you're going to regret it." It wasn't the words themselves that chilled me, but the delivery. It was impossible to tell if it was a threat from him, a warning about Hannah's wrath, or a guilt trip from a brother who felt abandoned. All I knew was that it felt like he was drawing a line in the sand, and I was on the wrong side of it. Would you bow to that kind of family pressure, or would you stand your ground, even if it meant making everything 1,000 times worse? I knew I couldn't let it end like that. I couldn't let some sterile legal threat and a cryptic phone call be the final word. I needed to look Hannah in the eye and hear it from her. I sent her a text. "Can we please meet? Just you and me." To my surprise, she agreed almost instantly, suggesting a neutral, chic coffee shop in the next town over. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting perfectly poised at a small table, a cup of herbal tea untouched in front of her. She looked like a porcelain doll, beautiful, composed, and completely impenetrable. Sat down, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hannah," I started, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need you to tell me why. Why the money? Why the NDA? We're family. We love Mark. We love you. Why are you treating us like a liability?" She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea before answering. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something real in her eyes, not anger, but fear. "It's because you're family that I have to do this," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She explained that her own family had been through a vicious public scandal years ago. Her uncle had a messy divorce that turned into a business dispute, and it was all over the local papers. Relatives took sides, leaked private emails, and spoke to reporters. "It was a nightmare," she said, her composure cracking just a little. "It tore our family apart, and the humiliation was immense." She went on to talk about the venue, how the costs had spiraled out of control, and how her parents were footing a bill that was almost $500,000. They wanted assurances that their investment was protected, that the event wouldn't be cheapened by tacky cell phone pictures or turned into a source of gossip. "The NDA isn't about you," she insisted. "It's a shield. The payment? It's to ensure that every single person in that room is as invested in the sanctity and privacy of the day as we are. It creates a curated group of people who understand the value of what we're creating." I listened, and a part of me almost understood the fear, but it wasn't enough. "I understand being afraid of drama," I said carefully, "but a shield can easily become a cage, Hannah. You're not curating a guest list, you're demanding compliance. You're asking the people who have loved Mark his entire life to sign away their right to speak freely, to share a memory. That's not about privacy, it's about control." Her face hardened again, the vulnerability vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "It's my wedding, Sarah. I have the right to control it." Just as the tension between us reached its peak, the coffee shop door opened, and Mark walked in. My heart sank. She must have told him where she was going. He walked right over to our table, his eyes darting between us. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't try to mediate. He just looked at me, his face set in a mask of frustration. "Sarah, what are you doing? I told you to drop this. You're stressing her out right before our wedding." He reached down and took Hannah's hand, a gesture of solidarity that felt like a door slamming in my face. He was choosing her peace over a conversation with his own sister. That's when something inside me snapped. The politeness, the careful wording, it all evaporated. "Are you kidding me, Mark?" I said, my voice rising. "She's the one sending legal threats to our parents. This NDA isn't a shield, it's a weapon. It creates a massive power imbalance where she and her family hold all the cards, and the rest of us are legally bound to silence. We can't even defend ourselves if she decides to spin some story later on." Hannah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her eyes were blazing. "See, Mark? This is exactly what I was talking about. She doesn't want to understand. She just wants to cause trouble. She's trying to sabotage our wedding because she can't stand that you're happy with someone she can't control." She looked at me, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "I will rescind the invitation for anyone who continues to cause this kind of trouble. Don't test me." I was left staring at her, a chilling question hanging in the air. Was she really just protecting herself from a past trauma, or was she protecting something much, much bigger? If someone you loved asked you to sign away your freedom of speech just to keep the peace, would you do it? After that disastrous meeting, I drove straight to my brother Tyler's apartment. I was shaking, half with anger and half with a growing sense of dread. There was something more going on here, something deeper and uglier than just a bridezilla's quest for perfection. Tyler was already on his laptop when I got there. "I've been doing some digging," he said, turning the screen toward me. Not in a creepy way, just public records, old news articles. He showed me what he'd found. It wasn't one single explosive secret, but a series of unsettling breadcrumbs. The family scandal Hannah mentioned wasn't just a messy divorce. Her uncle had been accused of embezzling from the family business. It had settled out of court, but the articles hinted at a brutal internal war, with family members testifying against each other. There was a lawsuit, sealed from the public, but its existence was noted. Then he pulled up another link. It was a local society blog from Hannah's hometown, dated about 3 years ago. It mentioned Hannah's previous engagement to a man from another prominent family. The post announced the engagement, and then, 6 months later, a terse retraction simply stated the wedding was off. There were no details, but the comment section, which hadn't been moderated, was filled with whispers of a massive fight over a prenuptial agreement and accusations that Hannah's family had been making unreasonable financial demands. It was a pattern: control, money, and legal documents. This wasn't a new strategy for them. It was their standard operating procedure. "This NDA," Tyler said, looking at me seriously, "it isn't just to stop Aunt Carol from gossiping. It's to make sure that if things go south with Mark, or if there's some kind of financial dispute, we're all legally gagged. She's preemptively silencing any potential character witnesses against her." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Paying the money and signing that paper wasn't a gesture of peace. It was an act of complicity. It was agreeing to be a silent, paid extra in the meticulously crafted production of her life. It was saying, "Yes, I agree that your control is more important than my family's integrity. Yes, I will buy my own muzzle." It meant that if Mark was ever hurt by her, if he was ever trapped or manipulated, I would have signed a legal document promising not to speak up for him. The moral dilemma was gone. In its place was a cold, clear certainty. I took out my phone, my hands steady now. I opened the email chain with the RSVP and the menacing legal reminders. I hit reply. I kept it short, calm, and firm. I didn't make accusations. I didn't bring up the past. I simply stated my truth. "Dear Mark and Hannah," I wrote, I love you both, and I wish you nothing but happiness on your wedding day and in your marriage. Unfortunately, I cannot in good conscience sign the confidentiality agreement or comply with the guest payment policy. As a result, I must respectfully decline my invitation. I will be thinking of you on your big day. Love, Sarah. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The digital RSVP deadline had passed hours ago. The ball was in their court now. Would Hannah really enforce her ultimatum against her new sister-in-law, or would she finally back down? The response didn't take long. It didn't come as a private text or a phone call. It came as a public execution. About an hour after I sent my email, a message from Hannah appeared in the extended family group chat, the one with all the aunts, uncles, and cousins. It was a screenshot of the guest policy payment page, followed by a message that read, "A quick update for everyone. The final guest list has been submitted to our security team. We are so thrilled to celebrate with all of you who have confirmed. For those who have chosen to not comply with the event policies, we respect your decision, but please understand that only confirmed guests will be admitted to the venue. We can't wait for our perfect day." It was a masterclass in passive aggression. She hadn't named names, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew who she was talking about. Talking about me, Tyler, and my father. The family group chat, which had been simmering for a week, absolutely exploded. Some cousins sent private messages of support. Others publicly questioned Hannah's message. Aunt Carol, of course, chimed in with, "Oh dear, I hope there isn't any trouble." The chat became a digital war zone. Then my phone rang. It was Mark. He didn't even say hello. "Are you happy now?" he yelled, his voice raw with a pain that was quickly curdling into rage. "You had to be so dramatic, didn't you? You had to make your little stand, and now you've turned our entire wedding into a circus. Mom is hysterical, and Hannah is in her room crying her eyes out. This was supposed to be the happiest week of our lives, and you and Dad have ruined it with your selfishness." I tried to reason with him, to explain, but he wouldn't listen. He hung up on me. My mom called next, weeping so hard I could barely understand her. My dad, hearing the commotion, came into the living room, took one look at my face, and without a word, went upstairs, packed an overnight bag, and left. "I'm going to a hotel," he said, his voice grim. "I can't be in this house right now." The home that had been our sanctuary was completely fractured. We were a family in ruins, all because of a wedding that hadn't even happened yet. Later that night, there was a quiet knock on my door. It was my dad. He looked 100 years old. He came in and sat on my couch, staring at his hands. "I can't fix this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But maybe money can." He pulled out his checkbook. "I'll pay for you and Tyler, and I'll sign the damn thing. I'll tell them it was all a misunderstanding. We'll go, we'll smile for the pictures, and we'll put this family back together." It was the ultimate act of surrender from the most principled man I knew. He was willing to sacrifice his own integrity just to stop the bleeding. I put my hand over his on the checkbook and gently closed it. "No, Dad," I said, my eyes filling with tears. "It's not about the money. It never was. And I won't let you do this." He just nodded, the fight gone from his eyes. The final call came from Mark around midnight. He sounded defeated, hollowed out. "Hannah says if this family drama doesn't stop, she's calling the whole thing off," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "She says she can't marry into a family that's this hostile. So this is it, Sarah. The fighting stops, or there's no wedding." I didn't know what to say. Was he bluffing, trying one last desperate guilt trip to force us into compliance? Or was this it? Was this the real breaking point, the moment where everything would either be saved or completely destroyed? Would you let a wedding be ruined to protect your own integrity? Why or why not? The morning of the wedding, I woke up with a heavy heart but a clear mind. I wasn't going to let my brother get married without a single member of his original family there to witness it. I wasn't going to be a guest. I wasn't going to sign their contract, but I was going to be there. I put on a simple, dark dress, not celebratory, but respectful, and I drove the 2 hours to the estate. I had no intention of crashing the party. I just needed to be on the grounds, a silent witness to whatever was about to unfold. The venue was even more breathtakingly opulent than the pictures had suggested. It was a palace of marble and manicured hedges, with valets in crisp uniforms, and the faint sound of a string quartet drifting through the air. But as the guests began to arrive in their expensive cars, I noticed something jarring. The guest list was incredibly thin. There were maybe 50 people in total, and I recognized almost none of them. They were all elegant strangers, dressed in designer clothes, looking more like attendees at a corporate gala than guests at a wedding. It was Hannah's curated list, bought and paid for. The few family members who had caved and paid, couple of distant cousins, and my mom's sister, Aunt Carol, avoided my eyes as they walked past. I found a spot on a stone bench in a secluded part of the garden, a place where I could see the outdoor ceremony area but remain unseen. As the start time neared, I saw Mark walk to the altar. He looked pale and terribly alone. When Hannah appeared, she was a vision in white, a perfect bride for a perfect wedding. But as she joined him at the front, I saw their exchange. It wasn't a loving whisper, it was tense. She was hissing something at him, her smile a brittle facade. I saw Mark shake his head, a look of anguish on his face. Then, a small commotion rippled through the guests. Phones were being subtly checked. A moment later, my own phone buzzed. It was a text from Tyler with a screenshot. It was from Aunt Carol's social media page. She had posted a single, cryptic photo from inside the venue. A picture of the empty family section in the front row with the caption, "So sad when families get torn apart, praying for peace today." It wasn't a picture of the bride. It didn't mention the cost, but it was enough. It was a crack in the perfect, silent wall Hannah had tried to build. A relative who had paid and signed the NDA had leaked the truth of the family's absence. Hannah's worst fear, a public narrative she couldn't control, was materializing in real time. I saw her look at her own phone, her face contorting with fury. She turned to Mark, her whisper now audible even from where I was sitting. "She's ruining it! Your family is ruining everything!" The officiant cleared his throat, trying to begin the ceremony, but Hannah ignored him. Mark just stood there, looking from his furious bride to the empty chairs where his parents and siblings should have been. And then, something in him seemed to shift. The scared, defensive look in his eyes was replaced by a quiet, heartbreaking resolve. He reached into his jacket pocket. Hannah must have thought it was the rings, but it wasn't. It was a folded piece of paper. The ceremony music faltered and stopped. The entire crowd went silent. Hannah paused, looking at him with confusion. He unfolded the paper. It was a copy of the NDA. He looked at Hannah, his voice shaking but clear, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I can't," he said. "I can't start our marriage by buying the silence of my own family. I can't build our future on a foundation of contracts and threats." The crowd let out a collective gasp. Hannah's face went from furious to utterly horrified. In that single, terrifying, beautiful moment of reckoning, my brother had to choose. Would he choose the perfect, controlled world Hannah was selling, or would he choose the messy, imperfect, but real love of his family? In the deafening silence that followed Mark's words, he did something I will never forget. He held up the non-disclosure agreement, the piece of paper that had torn our family apart, and he slowly, deliberately ripped it in half. Then he ripped it again. The sound of the tearing paper was the loudest thing I had ever heard. He let the pieces fall to the ground like confetti at a funeral. He turned to the small crowd of stunned guests, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry to all of you," he said. "And to my family who aren't here today because I let my fear get the best of me, I am so, so sorry." He looked directly at Hannah, and for the first time, he wasn't her puppet. He was my brother again. "This isn't love, Hannah. It's a business deal, and I don't want it." He turned and walked down the aisle, right past the shocked faces and through the ornate gates, leaving his perfect bride and his $500,000 wedding behind. I stood up from the bench and ran to meet him. When he saw me, he just collapsed into my arms, sobbing like a little boy. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he cried over and over again, and all I could say was, I know you are. It's okay, we've got you." The days that followed were a blur. Quiet conversations, tearful apologies, and the slow, painful work of putting our family back together. Mark apologized to my parents, to Tyler, to everyone he had hurt and pushed away. He admitted he had been so terrified of another public humiliation like his last breakup that he had allowed himself to be convinced that Hannah's extreme measures were a form of protection. He saw now that they were a prison. The wedding was, of course, officially canceled. Hannah and her family went into damage control mode, but the story was already out. Aunt Carol, it turned out, had a lot to say once that NDA was symbolically ripped to shreds. The fallout was messy, but it was their mess, not ours. Mark and Hannah never spoke again. My brother moved back into his old room at my parents' house for a few weeks, and it was like watching someone slowly deprogram. We spent hours just talking, rebuilding the trust that had been so badly broken. There are still scars, of course. A wound that deep doesn't heal overnight. But for the first time in over a year, I have my brother back, the real him. The experience taught us all a hard lesson about the difference between setting boundaries and building walls, between love and control. A wedding is supposed to be a celebration of a union, a joining of two families. It should never, ever be a transaction where your presence is for sale and your voice is the price you pay for admission. So I want to ask you all, would you have paid the $3,000? Would you ever sign a silence agreement for a wedding, even for someone you love? When it comes down to it, who do you think was right in this situation? The family who stood on principle, or the fiancé who wanted to protect her perfect day at any cost? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Because at the end of the day, we learned that sometimes the loudest vows are the ones you don't say out loud.